agencies. Our purpose is to, quote, advise and assist LEAs in improving student outcomes. We have a 5-member governing board. Sue Burr is the representative from the State Board of Education. Michael Watkins is the county superintendent. Matthew Navo is the district superintendent. Tim Sobranti is the teacher. And Tom Perlickson, of course, is the state superintendent. And our executive director is Carl Cohn. Next slide, please.
Just have it.
Okay. I'm happy to keep going as the slide comes back. So the way in which the CCEE sees itself as different than what has been tried before is we don't see ourselves as an entity that's going to come in with a heavy hand and tell you what to do or how to do. We see ourselves as strategic thought partners in supporting the work of an LEA. That in many ways is a lot harder than what has been tried before under DATE or SATE or IIUSP, but we do think that it is the right way to bring about sort of long-term change within an LEA. We have these guiding principles that are now up on the screen. We have profound respect for the work that LEAs do. Their knowledge of their own community, their own students, vastly exceeds ours. And so when we do work with a district or a charter school or a county, we approach it with this idea that most of the information that is needed to help those students is within the LEA. And we're providing an additional perspective, some additional expertise, and additional support to support the LEA in moving forward in the way that it wants to move forward. We also believe that engaging families and the community is critical. That is a key component of local control. And when we work with LEAs, that is one of the things that we will be talking to them about and supporting their work in. If we really want to bring about long-term systemic change for students, a key component of that is that it must be owned at the local level. If we come in and tell a district or a charter school or a county what to do, and it's not owned by those individuals and that LEA, then it is not going to continue after we leave. We've seen that again and again and again. And so we are not about coming in and imposing our will on anybody. And lastly, and I think this is the most critical point, we have an urgency about closing the achievement gap, improving student outcomes for our at-risk students. But it can't happen overnight. The example about this Dr. Cohn oftentimes gives is that when he was superintendent in Long Beach for 10 years, he won the Broad Prize, considered a very successful example of sort of urban superintendency. You did not see significant improvements for student outcomes in the first 5 years that he was there. It took until years 6 through 10 to really see the long-term sort of systemic change that has continued from when he left, actually. And so I think that when we talk about the need to make change, we have this urgency, but we also realize that if you move too quickly and too individually, not at a systemic level, then that long-term change may be fleeting. Next slide, please. So one of the things that the state did when they created the CCEE, or shortly thereafter, was to allocate $20 million of one-time funding to the CCEE to establish a 3-year process to provide PD to LEAs on the rollout of the evaluation rubrics, which just were approved recently, and the LCAP template, which just was revised. We put together, and our governing board approved in October, a professional development implementation plan. It contains 4 components. I'm going to briefly cover what those 4 are. And then if you want to read in more depth, it is available at the website ccee-ca.org. But before we go to cover those 4 components in brief, Alicia, I'll turn it back to you to cover this slide.
Do you have any questions so far about the California Collaborative for Excellence in Education? Ask them now. Any typing going on? All right. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any questions about CCEE, Josh. We'll move forward.
All right. So briefly, the 4 components. Hopefully you've all heard about this first component. It's the annual workshops. The purpose of these workshops is to provide a common baseline, at least to interpret, understand, and use the evaluation rubrics. We have fall and spring workshops. The fall workshops for 2016 are currently ongoing. We have 2 more. One is scheduled for tomorrow in Reading, and then the final one is scheduled for Saturday in Ontario. We will also have workshops in the spring, likely to be covered in March, and that's sort of the basic outline of component 1. Next slide, please. Component 2 is what we're calling aligned local trainings, and the purpose here is to support local trainers and local trainings, be it by ACSA or a county office or CSBA or any other entity that does trainings, but to have those trainings be aligned with each other. So the information that you get from one of those local trainers is consistent with, if not the same as, the information you get from another local trainer, and that the audiences and the content delivered through these local trainings is not, doesn't become inconsistent when you change audiences. So if you are a parent, you are receiving the same or consistent content, not the same, but consistent content that if you are a teacher or principal or superintendent or a board member. And the way we're going to do this is that we are hosting content development meetings. We've invited ACSA, we've invited county offices, we've invited CSBA and other associations to come together to propose content to be included in this sort of content library. We'll discuss the proposed content at these meetings. We will then approve inclusion of that content in the library, and then that content from the library can then be used in these local trainings, and the local trainers will know that the content is aligned with all the other trainings going on. We've asked county offices to step up and serve as regional leads to train local trainers, and the first of these content development meetings is occurring in early December, and the initial sort of content of the library should be live by early January. Next slide, please. So component 3 has 2 pieces. One are professional learning networks. These are based upon professional learning communities, or that model. And the idea here is that we would ask county offices, statewide associations to bring together as a network individuals to talk about their practice related to the rubrics and the template. We've done some early adopter PLNs. ACSA is actually hosting one of those, and so we're really excited to see over the next 6 months as those roll out what those look like, and then we will be supporting additional professional learning community networks in 17-18 and 18-19. The second component of this, next slide, thank you, is what we're calling professional learning exchanges. And these are to support the work of the PLN facilitator, him or herself. And so we don't want to maintain what is oftentimes a siloed experience within education. And so by bringing together the facilitators of these different PLNs, allowing them to talk to each other, share experiences, share knowledge, we think it will not only strengthen the practice of the facilitator and the experience of the PLN, but it will also allow for the aggregation and dissemination of information on a much more consistent statewide basis. Next slide, please. So the last component is what we're calling the LCFF support desk. And this is, the purpose of this is to provide an opportunity for LEAs to ask sort of substantive inquiries related to the use of the rubrics and the template as tools for continuous improvement. I think we should be clear here, though, that this is not intended for sort of urgent questions. If you want to know whether it's the Green Act or the Brown Act that applies to your Parent Advisory Committee meeting, this is not going to be the place for you. That is a question for your county or the question for the state board or the question for CDE. These will be questions that are sort of more nuanced, more programmatic, sort of a one-off consult, and we will work with the state board, CDE, and CSESA prior to responding so that we can ensure that our responses are consistent across the board. And we anticipate that this support desk will go live in January of 2017.
Does anyone have any questions about the components of the professional development around the evaluation rubrics being provided by CCEE? Any typing going on? You are doing such an excellent job of explaining, Josh, that there are no questions. Isn't that
All
awesome?
right, I'll take you at your word.
Awesome. We're going to move on to the next section.
So we wanted to take this opportunity to give you a brief sort of overview and preview of things you may know, but I think it is helpful to remind ourselves of where we were and where we are. And then after we cover these changes, we're going to quickly cover some of the pieces of the evaluation rubrics that if you've attended the workshop, you will be familiar with, and if you haven't, then this will be potentially your first time seeing what these rubrics might look like. So,
Josh, can I interrupt you for a second?
By all means.
There is a question. Are the local trainers someone from the local districts?
In most situations, probably not. We would envision a local trainer being someone from ACSA, someone from a county office. But if a district wanted to identify a local trainer who would then turn around and train their community, that certainly is a possibility. There's no restriction about it being from a district or even a charter school, but we anticipated that in most situations the trainer would be from a county office or from a statewide association or from a nonprofit organization.
When referencing a team, who might that be?
So we wanted to model through these workshops that have been going on sort of how we would ideally think of an LEA that would be approaching sort of local control issues. And so a team is really self-defined. A team could be the superintendent, board president, union president. A team could be the chair of your parent advisory committee, a couple of key principals, and an assistant superintendent. When we think of a team, we think that, who is it that is going to be working on your LCAP? Who is it that you're going to be consulting with on a regular basis, be it within your cabinet or within your community, around what the rubrics tell you? And we want to encourage you to bring those people with you to the workshops and other trainings so that you can learn together, not only receive the content together, but process and reflect together to sort of practice working together around sort of implementing and executing local control.
What is the process for signing up to be a trainer?
So we will be publicizing that come January. But the short version of that is that you can either be trained by a regional county office of education, one of those regional leads, or by the CCEE. And there will probably be webinars or in-person trainings where people interested in becoming a trainer can come and be trained on the content library.
Have the regional leads been identified?
Yes, for the most part they have. We will be publishing, the CCEE has a governing board meeting on December 1st. We will be publishing the agenda for that for that meeting on Monday, and Monday or shortly thereafter we will be publicizing who those regional leads are. We're waiting until we have all of them secure and confirmed before we publicize the names. I don't want to call anyone out and then have things change last minute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Move on.
Okay. All right. So again, changes under LCFF. As a board member, I was around before LCFF. And I was elected in the midst of the Great Recession, and it was really not what I had signed up to do, was to cut back program. And so I think that maybe I have a distinct view about this, but I think that local control is incredible. Not perfect by any means, but it's such a difference between what things were like prior to LCFF. And I think it is helpful to remind ourselves, that before, most of what we did was state-directed, and then, based upon our collective bargaining agreement. Now there is at least a significant greater degree of local authority around how do you spend your funds. Before, I'm a board member in Berkeley. We did not have the number of at-risk students that some of our neighboring school districts had. Neighboring school districts had, and yet we received on a per-student basis more money than those neighboring districts. And while we could all use more money, that certainly was not the equitable way of distributing the resources that we had. And so now we actually have additional funding for low-income foster youth and EL students, and it's a much more equitable distribution of the existing funds. Now, certainly it is inadequate across the board, but on a sort of an equity distributional basis, it is much more fair. Prior to LCFF, the only way we really had to measure and compare ourselves was the API, which was based upon the CSTs almost exclusively. And now we have these really robust, or that will be robust, multiple performance indicators that don't just show how we're doing across test scores, but across multiple indicators. And at a recent CPAG meeting, California Practitioner Advisory Group, that is a group of practitioners that the state board has created to advise on these issues. The point was made that in the vast majority of cases, LEAs are doing well across some indicators and not well across others. And so if you restrict the measure of an LEA success exclusively to test scores, you lose the fact that some LEAs, while doing good in test scores, are not doing well in other areas, and vice versa, that some LEAs that are doing poorly in test scores, yet are doing well in other areas. And so we think that this is a much more comprehensive and honest assessment of how LEAs are doing. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, there we go. All right. So, I got to go back a couple. Perfect. Thank you. So the other thing we know under LCFF, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail in a minute, is
there is a question, Josh.
Sorry. Yeah?
For charters, would they be going through the LEA authorizing the charter?
You mean for training?
Stephen, is that for training that you're asking that question?
Well, when we, if the question is about where would charters get trained, or would receive sort of the training, they could go through any one that they choose. They could work with the CCEE or regional lead or county office. If CCSA, the California Charter School Association, decides to identify local trainers and have them be trained, they could receive training through that. It really would be up to the charter school where they wanted to get the information. Okay. So that does not answer your question. Please, yeah. Please just write it in and let me know. So additionally, changes under LCFF. So before we were looking at either sort of outcome or growth, and now we're looking at both. We actually almost equally balance how much you're improving versus how well you're doing. And I think that sort of is, people I think may disagree about the right balance to strike between those two, but the fact that we are balancing those two rather than choosing one or the other is definitely a step in the right direction from before. I touched on this briefly before, but you have test scores and now you have multiple measures beyond test scores. And lastly, and this is sort of where the CCEE comes in, previously the support that was offered to districts and charters identified as struggling was prescriptive. Here is what you have to do. I'm going to come with my clipboard and check, check, check. Here's your plan. Do it. Goodbye. now it's where we are working side by side with the LEA, helping them figure out what they want to do to build capacity to create that long-term change. All right, next slide.
Questions about what was just covered. Can you speak about local measure rubrics? How will this rubric be designed? Will each district determine what the cut points are?
Yep. So that's a great question, and we're going to cover that in the next section.
What's the process? Oh, we already did that question.
Yeah.
What's the process of signing up to be a trainer? We did that one. Okay. I'm moving on, Josh.
All right.
No questions so far.
So the LCFF evaluation rubrics. So this is basically the replacement for the API. There's no longer a single number. It is intended both for accountability purposes, but also for transparency, so that members of your community, you and your cabinet, your school board, your principals, your teachers can understand sort of how an LEA is doing across multiple measures and for multiple student groups. There are three main parts as the CCEE sees it with respect to the evaluation rubrics. Some people may sort of divide the data display, that first piece, into a couple different pieces, but the way that we have been talking about it is that there will be this data display with multiple data layouts, sort of taking different looks at your data across these multiple measures and multiple student groups. In addition, there will be these statements of model practice, which will be written, maybe page 2, 3-page long summaries for each performance indicator, such that if you want to begin to delve deeper within that indicator, you can. And then connected to that will be links to external resources that if you want additional resources on that particular indicator, you can find them. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to sort of delve into the first of those three parts, the data display, and cover in brief what it looks like and sort of how to begin to think about interpreting it. So this will, the actual visual is still in flux. The state board has not finalized it yet, but it will look something similar to this. You will have a list of state indicators, and currently there are 7 of them, and you will have a list of local performance indicators, and there are 4 of them. We're going to take the state indicator section first, and then we'll go to the local performance indicator section, and then I'll come back to the question that was asked about sort of designing the rubric and determining the cut points, et cetera. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is sort of a zoomed in portion of that. And again, the actual visual may be slightly different. Some of the headers might be slightly different. Some of the language might be slightly different. But the basic concepts that I'm going to cover are here. So chronic absenteeism, suspension rate, English learner, graduation rate, college and career readiness, ELA assessment, and math assessment. Those, for the most part, are pretty self-explanatory. The college and career indicator is sort of probably the most nuanced, and if you want more information about that, the state board at their most two meetings ago has some good information, or you can email me directly, or Alicia, I'm sure she can sort of send you the fuller explanation of what that is. The exact measures of these may be modified slightly year to year. As you can see, chronic absenteeism is NA and college and career readiness is NA. That's because when these data layouts are published, probably early 2017, the college and career readiness and the chronic absenteeism will not be ready to be given. What you'll see is that we'll know the color of these performance categories. In addition, yep, we're going to cover that. We're going to cover that in the next slide. I just want to cover the state indicators and sort of what they are right now, and then we'll go into what the colors and the NA means and things like that.
Perfect.
In addition, the ELA assessment and the math assessment, they're changing the the way in which they're sort of being measured from a proficiency to a scaled score, and as a result, the performance categories, these colors for those two indicators may be slightly delayed. So it's possible that when it's published for the first time for your LEA, the only sort of colors you will see is suspension rate, English learner, and graduation rate. But the ELA assessment and the math assessment should follow shortly thereafter. Okay, so let's delve into what the colors mean. All right, so these are the state performance categories. You no longer have a number. Red is the lowest, blue is the highest. It's both color, both the color has meaning and what we're calling the pizza slices or the fruit slices have meaning, because some people are colorblind and so they can't distinguish between colors. And for those who want to print something out and don't want to spend the money to print it out in color, which is most LEAs, including mine, we print it out in black and white. And so you want to have something that that is meaningfully distinguished between the levels in both black and white and in color. Now, the way in which you arrive at these colors has to do with both your status and your change. And before I go there, I see a question about why do some pie charts have white slices versus all in color? And hopefully I answered that, but the red being the lowest has 1 of 5 slices filled in, and blue being the highest has 5 of 5 slices filled in. So while it's not a true number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's sort of a color scheme. That is one way to distinguish the red level from the orange level if you were to print it out in black and white. So hopefully I have answered that question. Okay, so all right. So there will be 3 other sort of symbols that you might see in the evaluation rubric data layout, or one or more places. One is an asterisk. That means that the student group for that indicator has between 11 and 29 students. So there won't be a color. You will not get one of those pies or fruit slices, whatever. The second symbol is these 3 dashes, and that indicates that you have a student group that consists of less than 11 students, and as you probably all know, because of FERPA, we can't release any information, even about the size of the student group, and so all you'll see is those 3 dashes, and then NA means that the data is not available. It could be that the data is not available because you are a high school district and the ELA and math assessment indicators just look at grades 3 through 8 scores and don't look at grade 11. Or it could be like we saw before, that the data for that indicator is simply not available, chronic absenteeism, but at some point it will become available.
You see the question around this is not based on actual data, but rather a distinction?
Yes, and so I'm going to cover how you get a color when we go to the next 2 slides.
So I'm going to skip past the question and answer slide because I don't think there are any other questions right now.
So this is perfect, yeah, this one. So as I mentioned before, we're now looking at both status, which is your outcome, and change. So to take graduation rate, for example, I would look at my 14-15 graduation rate. Let's say it's 85%. That's the status. And I would look at the change from the previous either year or an average of the previous 3 years. And the change calculation is sort of different depending upon the indicator. But let's just say that my previous year graduation rate for 13-14 was 83%, and my 14-15 is 85%. So my status would be 85%, and my change would be +2. Now, if my 13-14 graduation rate was 87%, and my 14-15 graduation rate was 85%, then my change would be -2. And you combine your status and change through reference to, excuse me, not a reference rabble, but a reference table. So, sorry for that typo.
Call it new datitis.
Say that again?
Call it new datitis.
Exactly, yes. So going on, let's see, we have a question. We are a small K school district with only one class per grade. So one of the things that we need to do sort of additional discovery on as a state, not just the CCEE, is how to ensure that these rubrics continue to serve small LEAs, whether that's a small school district or a small charter school, because of the issue that you've identified in this question around the number of students. So if you have a school of 150 students, in all likelihood, you will get meaningful, you will be able to get a color for each of the indicators. However, as you break it down based upon student group, you're likely to have only one or two student groups that meet the threshold and therefore will be large enough to receive a color for that student group. I know that the State Board has discussed this. We've been in consultation with SSDA as well as directly with a number of small school districts and counties that support small school districts to see how we can continue to help those small school districts sort of utilize this as a tool. But it is something that we need to keep an eye on. And as this rolls out, if you have challenges or problems, please let us know. Please talk to ACSA, SSDA, your county, so that we can get a sense of what's working and what's not working. Looking at other questions.
There's one that says, isn't it called a reference chart, not a reference table?
Yes, it is a reference chart. I've heard it reference table, but it's I think the State Board has typically used reference chart. That is a good correction. There's a question about when the data will be. So the status data is the most recent available from a statewide level. And so my understanding is that for when these rubrics are rolled out in early 2017, that for most indicators, the most recent data available will be for 14-15. And then the change is the year prior or multiple years prior to that. If the data for 15-16 becomes available, then I believe that that will become the status. But as of this month, when I checked in with the State Board, they thought that the status year would be 14-15. Moving on to the next question. Yes, so the question is about getting ELA and math results, not just for student groups. So the LEA as a whole will get a color, and then student groups will get a color, as long as they are of sufficient number to basically 30 or more. And so all I've showed you right now is the sort of top level data layout, sort of the basic one, but there will be additional sort of data layouts that break it down for each indicator down by student group, and then for each student group, break it down by each indicator.
Any other questions about this part? No one typing?
Well, while people are thinking, maybe we can move on and I can sort of briefly cover how there you go. So basic reference table, basic reference chart. So these will be different for each indicator. The cells, so if you look at the cell that corresponds to both very high and declined significantly, for example, each of those cells, those 25 cells, will have one of the 5 colors. And whether or not you are, take for example, a change, whether or not you are declined significantly, declined, maintained, increased, or increased significantly, will depend upon cut points that the state board has set. And those cut points differ for each indicator. So the cut point for suspension rates, of course, is going to be different than for graduation rates than it will be for ELA assessment and math assessment. Similarly, the same thing for status, very high, high, medium, low, or very low. They will be different for each indicator. And in fact, for some indicators, suspension rate being one, there will actually be multiple reference charts for that indicator. So for suspension rates, there will be a reference chart for an elementary school district, a reference chart for a unified school district, and a reference chart for a high school district. Similarly, there will be a reference chart for a elementary school, middle school, and high school, because these rubrics not only apply to LEAs, but they also will drill down to schools. I'm happy to go into more detail about those. Just so you know, the workshops that we have been offering cover this in much more detail, and they will we will be moving the content of the workshop onto a sort of archived webcast or webinar for it to be accessible, and that should happen sometime by January, if not earlier. So you'll be able to, if you want, log on to our website and then view in pieces that content that we've delivered through the workshops, so that you can drill down more on this reference chart and how it's used.
There's a few questions. If the status for an indicator is 14-15, then we have no useful data to evaluate programs for 15-16. I guess that's not a question, but a comment.
That is correct. And as a board member, I can tell you it has been a challenge, putting even aside the rubrics, when our staff does a Herculean job in getting us data whenever, as soon as they can, but because of the sort of necessary delay in processing the data, cleaning the data, ensuring that it is accurate, it is a challenge. And certainly the point that was raised by the comment is, yes, that if you're looking at 14-15 data, you will have the rubrics. This data cannot help you or your community evaluate a program that began on 15-16.
And then the ELA math achievement level outputs are scheduled to be approved at the December SBE meeting, correct? Only for grades 3 to 8. 11th grade will remain with college and career indicator, question mark?
Yes, it's at the January meeting. So they're going to approve the cut scores, which correspond to what changes decline significantly versus decline versus maintain versus increase significantly, and what status you would need to get high, very high, high, medium, low, or very low. And so those cut points will be determined in January, correct? At least that's the current plan.
And then the last question is, are there plans to include science and social studies eventually?
That has been discussed. I don't think, my understanding, and Alicia, maybe you can chime in on this, there hasn't been a definitive response, particularly on science. I know that there's been some debate about it. On social studies, I'm not aware of any strong movement to include a social studies indicator. Alicia, have you heard anything different than that?
If I were a gambler, I'd probably bet that science will end up there at some point. There's very strong support to have science be a part of it, but that's still a debate, as you say, in debate. I haven't heard social studies at all, so I'd be surprised if that ends up in the rubric.
So why don't we move on? So these are the local indicators. So unlike the state performance indicators, where your performance, your color, is determined by the reference chart that is set up by the state board. The local indicators are self-determined. And rather than getting colors, the ratings, sort of the equivalent of the color, is 3 sort of different ratings: met, not met, and not met for 2 years. The state has published standards, or very basic standards, about what each of those currently 4 local indicators mean, but they have yet to publish examples and other information on how a LEA would go about determining whether they've met, not met, or not met for 2 years. Some of them are pretty straightforward, have you administered a survey, but I would say if you want to know more, again, the workshops that we're doing provide that additional level of detail. I'm sure ACSA has resources that provide that as well, and the state board meeting from 2 meetings ago covered this and provided those standards. So if anyone's interested in what those standards are, of course they can email me or obviously Alicia, and they can go online to our website. We have the PowerPoint from the workshop available now, and the video sort of explaining it will be available by January, if not before. So next slide. So again, this just sort of reiterates what I said before in terms of those are the 3 self-determined ratings based upon these sort of qualitative state standards.
Well, any final questions for Josh as we conclude our webinar today? Is there a date in January when districts will receive the rubrics based on data districts?
That is the $20,000 question. So the short answer is no. Alicia, have you heard anything about when districts, LEAs, will get access to the evaluation rubrics, their specific one?
Originally it was November, and so there has not been an update as to when it's going to be available. It's supposed to be made public in January, and I think those timelines have been pushed, and no, I have not received or know of an update of that.
Okay. So just to, we being the CCEE and others pushed hard so that there'd be some time for an LEA to sort of view and see its evaluation rubrics, know what their colors are, and work with ACSA or their county or their colleagues to really understand what it means. And for there to be some delay between when it was received by the LEA and then it was made public, so that you and we could be much better prepared to answer the questions that we know will come when people see these colors.
Right.
And so, as Alicia mentioned, initially it was going to be available to the LEA, be sort of populated by sometime in November, and then be made public in January. So you'd have most of December, basically, to sort of do that process. It's unclear whether that timeline will hold because of the changes, both on the cut point part of it, as well as on the development of the website. And so the state board will hopefully provide an update on that, and I'm sure ACSA will provide an update whenever that information is made available.
A couple questions, Josh. Originally the evaluation rubric was supposed to have a actual reflective component as well as some resources connected to it. And someone has asked to kind of talk more about those 2 components. I'm going to guess that that's kind of moved into the template, the LCAP template, but
sort of yes and no. I mean, the new LCAP template certainly has places for there to be more narration. But if you, Alicia, if you could go back to the, what slide is it? It's slide 19, I believe. Yeah, so you see at the bottom of that slide is a narrative box. And from what we know right now, again, this could change, that we believe that this box will remain. And this will be an opportunity to provide, from a holistic perspective, additional information for the viewer, for the reader, to help interpret and understand what they're reading. And so while it's not reflective per student group or per indicator, it is reflective sort of, or the ability to be reflective on the whole for the, and it will be part of the rubric as somebody sees it. The process by which you'd upload that, any other restrictions or constraints about that, I'm not aware of, but that in theory should be there. That's what we've been told.
And in addition to that, you know, the LCAP template has added the summary, and in that summary is kind of your highlights of your data and the areas that you still want to work on in your data, as well as in the annual update, there's a large connection to the results of the work that has been done, and some analysis questions have been added to the annual update, and I think there are about 4 of them in there. So that will also assist you in doing that reflective component. I hope that answers your question, Joelle. And then, so data analysis, discussions, analysis of current goals and actions, et cetera, all have to be done within 3 to 4 months, plus writing the executive summary, budgets, et cetera. Question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that given, you know, when the first LCAP template came out, it was published in March, and then we all had to scramble to use it. Now, I think there's some understanding that it was new, and I think the same will be true here with the rubrics, but as we all know, not everyone is as forgiving and understanding as we might hope that they would be. So, but yeah, these next you know, 6-7 months will be challenging because of the continued development of the rubrics and the new LCAP template is going to be you know, a significant amount of work. But I guess what I would offer is and I'll use my experience as a board member. We have tried really hard to work with our county, and our county has done a very good job of reaching out to its districts to ensure that we are compliant from the county's perspective on our LCAP. And beyond that, really thinking about how we can use the LCAP components. So the annual update, you know, how did you do across these metrics? What did you implement? What didn't you implement? To really think about what we're doing well and what could be improved upon. And we're out of time, so I'll just say that, you know, that we were able to use the LCAP to identify our middle school bridge program as being a very poor performing program. And I think the rubrics will further allow us to do that analysis and to look at what is working and what's not working. Even if the data is a few years delayed, it will still allow us to get some sense of how we are doing compared with the rest of the state.
Can I add something in addition to that, folks?
Please. Remember
Remember that this is our 3rd year, and prior to the rubrics, we used the data we had available to us to go through our engagement process, to go through our annual update process, and I would encourage you to kind of really focus on that data until you feel like you have sufficient data from the rubrics as well.
I saw a question about can a district proactively request extra support and guidance from CCEE? And the short answer is yes. Please feel free to reach out to us and contact us. We have limited resources and staffing at this point, but we want to be as helpful as we can. So I can't promise that we'll be able to provide the support that one needs, but please reach out to us and we'll have a conversation and see what is wanted and what is possible, and we can then go from there.
And for everyone's knowledge, we have our archived recordings from all of our accountability webinar series at www.acsa.org/grwebinars. And today's will be available within 48 hours. If you have questions or you feel like you need to continue our conversation, Josh's contact information, as well as myself and those who know my colleague Martha Alvarez, who is also available for answering any questions you might have. I want to thank you, Josh and CCEE, for joining us today in our interactive webinar. We certainly appreciate your partnership and the support that you're providing all of the districts and leaders in the state of California.
Thank you for having me, Alicia. I appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.